So I think it was, both the talks were amazing. And I think it's important for us that experience is the key. So we need time in order to have experience. So self-parenting is the key for more experience. So please, have a question? We need the microphone.
You can just speak.
Yeah, because they need to
it's coming,
translate
right, the microphone
and
is coming.
record.
Just a quick question. Do we know the mechanism by which is it hormonal, for example? So there's a visual stimulus which then stimulates hormonal change or smell or endorphins, or what is it that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of hormonal changes across pregnancy. And in fact, if we look at the animal literature, people deep dive into all the neuromolecular changes. I actually work with animals as well and look at neurogenesis. But what I think we're seeing is, at least in terms of the pregnant women, we know now there's just been some research out showing that it's estradiol levels in late pregnancy that seem to be associated with, or are associated with, the changes in structure. So there's these changes across pregnancy that can be modifying the brain. But in terms of the interaction, we know oxytocin plays a role, dopamine plays a role. So there's not just one thing, but there's a lot of neurochemicals that are going to be working together to mediate the behavior. So I've talked just structure and function, but of course, hormones are playing a role as well as neurotransmitters. We don't know. I mean, we really neglected this area of research in general. So if you talk about serotonin, which is something I investigate and Christina does as well. We know that we actually don't know how it really changes across pregnancy and postpartum. We know some changes in some of the main hormones, but in terms of neurotransmitters, we have more work to do. But definitely there's a complex interplay with a number of neurochemicals in both mothers and fathers, and birthing and non-birthing parents. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think, yeah.
Yes.
No, yeah, perfect.
Thank you. One quick question. Is the change in the brain after birth related to other changes, other than the parenting factors?
Yeah. So, I mean, people ask, or we've also been thinking about this, what is the adaptive significance? So we talk a lot, or we study a lot, the parental brain or the maternal brain in relation to caregiving of the child, but what about other things? So people often ask, what about emotional regulation in general, or relationships, other relationships, and does that have a significance, this experience, in other functions of the brain with other people? Is that that's what you're asking to some degree? And we don't have that research yet exactly. We focus a lot on the caregiving piece, but we do know there's some fun research showing that visual memory is enhanced in both moms and dads as a function of the number of kids they have, and this is related to their brain age, I believe, as well, in midlife. So there's some research starting to come out linking cognitive capacities or abilities and brain changes, but it's quite sparse at this point. But it's an area wide open for more investigation.
So now I understand why my mother was rather strict with us and very indulgent with my children or her grandchildren.
Yeah.
Yes, it is like this.
Possibly.
Well, that's just a comment. I think the lesson for our conference is shared parenting. Both parents are important, and also parental alienation. Don't cut family bonds.
Yeah, I think for me, I look at this literature, and importance for this conference is that in order to parent, we need to have the experience with the child. So just because a mother gives birth, it doesn't mean she knows best. I think this is important, or biologically, she's primed to learn quickly to care for the baby. She's invested her whole life for 9 months into it. It makes sense, but it doesn't mean that other parents can't do it and can't do it just as well. So in terms of cutting bonds, I'm not looking at child development. I look at parents and parent development. And I think that this is something that's also important. Of course, stress impacts the parental brain. We know this. Mental health impacts the parental brain, all these factors, which you find in, disruptive interactions with individuals within the house, or if you're separated or divorced, or however you're, the trauma that exists in the home. Yeah. So I couldn't say Because your question is then alienation.
Just I
And the
want
brain?
to see how, if there's a lesson we can take for the main
So,
conference.
Yeah, I think it's really, well, for me, some of the takes home are the brain changes in both and all parents, and it's a
Okay.
function of experience. So that's important.
Okay.
I think that, parenting is also has benefits in the long-term health wise. People have shown this, and it can impact your brain for life, which isn't a bad thing. It actually could be beneficial, right? So we just need more research to verify this in the long term. Yeah, but I don't have the research to back up a specific argument. My point is, here's some data that you maybe can be creative using, because it shows there's biological basis for the importance of parenting for the parent and the experience with the child for the parent, whether or not they gave birth or not. And I think this is something that's important because we all have to learn how to parent.
Okay.
Yeah.
According to what we heard today, would you say the bond of a mother to the child or a father to the child is different or worse or better?
I think that this is actually a function of, well, the way I look at this is, a mom who gave birth, for example, she's invested 9 months of her life into producing the child. Her whole physiology has changed. So if I think of this from an evolutionary perspective, she is built biologically, the idea is in an ideal situation to pick up on the cues of the child pretty quickly to make sure that baby survives, right? That makes sense. You've just invested your life into it. So in terms of breaking the bond, I can see that the bond could potentially be stronger initially in a birthing parent because of the 9 months previously of being, having your body taken over or what have you. But I don't think we have any literature looking specifically at the bonding is also subjective, right? It's a perception. So yeah, in this sense, I mean, I can see from a biological sense that there's something quite significant in those early days because you're supposed to keep your baby alive. And if, it came out of you, you really want it to survive. I mean, but of course, there's many factors that are at play here. There is some research starting to look at the loss of children, so the disruption of the bond in terms of when the child dies. So a colleague of mine is looking at this in terms of neurophysiology in rodent models, and there's one study in humans in the context of pregnancy loss or miscarriage. So that's a bit different, of course, because the child no longer exists, but that could be an interesting way to tie in understanding of how breaking the bond might be impacting the brain of the parent who's had the bond broken because of alienation or what have you. So that might be a creative way to go.
Thank you very much.
With that. Yeah.
Just in additional to that, what you were talking about, the model of surrogate women.
Yeah.
That could be a population you could do some neurophysical research.
Yeah. This has come up too because this is an interesting one as well. Yeah, surrogates. Yeah. And there was a question back there, and then we should probably wrap it up.
Yes, I just wanted to quickly add that we also need to study more the brain of the child, the offspring. There are some studies about the offsprings
Of
the child, the children, see how they are impacted from shared parenting, and because
Yeah,
I'm sure it's
definitely.
beneficial, but there are not many studies. We have many theories how beneficial it is for the brain of the child, and it's good to have different experience and more stimuli, to have more than one parent and more caregivers, but there are not many studies for that, so we need more data.
So did you do any research, or do you know any research about relation between brain changes and psychopathology resulting in obstruction of child contact between parents?
I don't know if there's any research on that, but I've definitely done research on what I do is look at how stress impacts the maternal brain. And I have reviews on perinatal mental illness where you often see inability to care as you'd see in an individual who isn't struggling with a mental illness. But this is I mean, not answering your question, but there definitely are brain changes with mental illness. It's been more well studied in mothers and less in fathers. I only know one study so far is looking at depression in fathers and how it affects the brain specifically, but it does have an effect. And in mothers, we do know, although the literature is sparse, but for depression, there's significant changes in the brain, which isn't a surprise. And in fact, the changes with regards to depression, postpartum psychosis, those two illnesses have been studied a bit more than anxiety in terms of brain changes. And this is in mothers and postpartum. But we do see that what we're starting to see is the neurobiology of these mental illnesses during the postpartum period it is quite unique. So it involves the similar brain areas as depression or psychosis at another part of life. But in fact, because of the changes in the parental brain and the addition, of course, of having a child, there's some differences in how these brain areas are working together. But there's definitely links in neurobiology with mental illness and motherhood and likely fatherhood. I mean, I don't think mental illness discriminates in terms of brain neurochemistry on sex. But yeah, that's not necessarily getting at your question, but the brain does change as a function of our environment, right? Every day. So things like stress, trauma, relationship conflict, war, I mean, what you eat, how much you sleep, these things all affect your brain. And we also know that your interaction with your child, your brain is continually being modified as your child is, right? So it's a constant interaction and modification. So there's a lot of plasticity there. Yeah.
Thank you.